This is Candyland. It was originally created in 1948 by Eleanor Abbott and published by Milton Bradley in 1949. Eleanor had come up with the idea for the game when she was recovering from polio in a hospital ward that she shared with a number of small children. She wanted to give them a little bit of an escape from the day-to-day in the hospital in the form of a whimsical adventure through a magical land filled with candy. Of course, the end of the adventure would result in the children going to home sweet home. Now that changed in 1984 when Hasbro purchased Milton Bradley. They updated the game to what you see here, adding a series of colorful characters to the world of Candyland that did not exist before, as well as an adventurous story where the children would help find the missing King Candy and restore order to the world of Candyland. Now, this was a fun staple of my childhood, and I'm very excited to see that this new 2025 edition revisits the classic characters that I'm familiar with from the 1984 edition, while at the same time doing an excellent job of updating the series. So let's dive right in, starting with the game box. Right away we see it's a much smaller footprint than the 1984. That's because the 2025 game board does fold into quarters. It's kind of the fashion nowadays with board games to have a smaller footprint for storage. Now we of course see some familiar characters up front, Princess Lolly, King Candy, and Queen Frostine, all with their updated character art that both looks fresh and harkens back to the original 1984 depictions of them. We also notice these little windows at the bottom of the box here where you can see the new colorful character figurines. We have 5 figurines with this edition of Candyland, one of which being the new gummy bear characters that serve as non-player characters for the new game mode that they'll be introducing. We'll have a look at that in a bit. When we flip the game box over, we see an adult playing with some kids, which I do like reinforcing that these are great bonding exercises. You should definitely be playing board games with the kids in your life. You'll build lasting memories, and it helps develop the skills that they'll need to move on to more complex board games and have fun with the family. Now, when we open this up, we see this lovely cardboard space saver that gives you a brief glimpse of the story that's in store for you. However, the primary story of the game is actually printed on the back of the rules, so we'll have a look at that when we get to the rule book. You'll also notice a lovely vacuum-formed organizer that holds the 5 little figurines here. It reminds me very much of the vacuum-formed organizer I received in the modern edition of Monopoly, in that it has a nice, clear, hard plastic lid that snaps onto the lower tray, keeping everything organized very nicely. Now, the board and the game tokens and magic bag are stored below that little cardboard organizer. Now, I want to address the tokens right away. I know these are kind of square. They're actually more the shape of like a wrapped candy. You see little bows on either end. They basically deliver the same information as the cards. You get 1 or 2 colored squares or a piece of candy indicating where you should move your character to. However, instead of drawing cards from the top of a stack at the beginning of each of your turns, that stack being shuffled only once at the beginning of the game, now players will have the opportunity to draw blindly their movement token from this, what they call magic bag here, which gives you a little bit more of a feeling of control over your fate, which I think is something quite nice. A lot of people tend to be rough on Candyland for the fact that there's really no strategy or decision making, and that is by design. Remember that this was made for children who were ill to be able to pass the time while they were in the hospital. So it's really more about the experience and the social interaction than just about anything else. But that being said, when you have a stack of cards that's already been shuffled, it feels like your fate is set. Whereas when you have the magic bag full of movement tokens, it feels like you have a little bit more control over your fate, even if it's still just random chance, which I think is great. The figurines are gorgeous. They are lovely. They are chunky. They're highly detailed. The kids are adorable, and the sculpts match the art of the kids on the board beautifully. I love it. We also have, like I said, a non-player character. These gummy bears, one is a sweet bear and one is a sour bear. So one's a smile, one's a frown. I thought that was really adorable. When we look at the game art on the board itself, Now, this is very reminiscent of the 1984, however, you'll see there are some geographical changes to Candyland. Plumpy is still near the beginning of the board, but now Gloppy, who used to be in the molasses swamp up here, is now near the bottom of the board and is in charge of the Merry Chocolate Marsh. Grandma Nut also moves from the western portion of the map to the eastern portion of the map, southeastern actually, taking the place of where Mr. Mint used to be in the Peppermint Forest, which is now in the northwest of the map. Now, the Ice Cream Beach takes the place of the Ice Cream Sea, which used to be the Ice Cream Floats, which I find very interesting because the art here in the 2025 edition is reminiscent of both the Ice Cream Sea and Ice Cream Floats. The Ice Cream Sea being in 84, the Ice Cream Floats being introduced in the original version of the game, featuring ice cream sandwich bars that were floating along like boats. Now we see King Candy riding a raft of what looks like, I don't know if that's a graham cracker, biscuit, or if that's supposed to be like an orange creamsicle. I'll let you decide. But we also see Princess Lolly still near the center of the map. We see the Licorice Lagoon featuring Lord Licorice, also very close to where he originally existed. The Gummy Bears. Now, replacing Jolly, the only character not to return from 1984 is Jolly, the guardian of the Gumdrop Pass, which used to be on the eastern side of the map. Now we have the Gummy Mountain Pass on the western side of the map that is guarded by the Sweet and Sour Gummy Bears. So only one character didn't make it back, and that was Jolly. But I guess it kind of makes sense. Kids would be more familiar nowadays with gummy bears than they would gumdrops. Similar to how Gloppy being chocolate or fudge, that would be more familiar to modern children than, say, molasses. Not a whole lot of kids are rushing out to eat molasses. I don't know. I don't know that they were in 1984 either, but I feel like a lot of what they did in 1984 was also intended to make the game feel old-timey as well, to make the adventure feel like it had already existed for a while, whereas this 2025 edition is definitely designed to be relatable. When we get down to brass tacks about the art, I will say I actually appreciate the update. It's bright and it's colorful without being overly busy. One of the things that's plagued a lot of other versions of Candyland were that some of the game boards were very, very busy. It was very difficult to see what was going on or concentrate. This here is very focused. I don't think that it's any more busy than the 1984. In fact, I think that they're right about on par. In fact, the 2025 is a hair cleaner. And be it that it's bigger with larger spaces, a little bit easier to navigate with these nice chunky player pieces as well. So that being said, I did notice that we don't have sticky spots. The shortcuts are a little less dramatic. We still have the little rainbow shortcut. We still have the Gummy Mountain Pass. Rainbow shortcuts a little bit earlier in the 84 edition. Gumdrop Pass also on a different part of the map. We do have now a little bit of a split in the trail, which isn't a huge shortcut here. In fact, it's about the same amount of spaces, really. They just have the trail split near the Licorice Lagoon. Yeah, I mean, just counting it's 4 spaces, so it's the same thing. Just different, like, Y in the track. I don't know, just to have fun there. Overall, there are fewer spaces, quite obviously, in the 2025 than what we have in the 1984, but I don't think that it harms the game at all. We did lose the sticky spaces, which you'll notice are denoted by these little black dots on the 84 edition. They were denoted actually by crossed licorice sticks in the 2010 edition, which I thought was a nice artistic update. However, now the only specialty spots that we see are these candy pieces here, and those will actually work the same as the candy cards in the 1984 edition. If you draw one of the tokens that has a candy piece, your character teleports to that space. Now, should you go through all the tokens in the bag and have to refill them, the ones with candy pieces are discarded for the refilling because they can only be used once per game. So, interesting little rule caveat there. Now, the traditional game rules. Here's an interesting thing. So the game still plays with the traditional rules, but we now have a new rule set. So let's take a quick look at that. The rules that we receive with the 2025 edition come printed on this nice trifold here, this nice trifold brochure. It features both rule sets, your traditional rule set where you're playing with up to 4 players, and your rule set with the new non-player character, which can be played solo, or as I advise, you can play with up to 3 players against the NPC as well. In fact, I don't really see a reason why you couldn't play all 4 players against the NPC if you wanted to encourage children to work together as a team to defeat the gummy bears. Now, keep in mind, the game when you're playing with the NPC is actually a little bit more challenging because you have to get all of your player characters across the line. So if you're playing solo, you're going to be taking charge of 3 of these player characters, and they all have to get across the line before the gummy bear. But I think that if you want to encourage a group of kids to cheer for each other and try to beat the gummy bear as opposed to feel competitive, it's a nice little change of pace. So I actually really like that they added the non-player character. I really like that they replaced drawing cards with drawing these tiles, and when they did that, they included it in the new lore. Now, in 1984, the story was that the children were in Candyland trying to find the missing King Candy, and Lord Licorice was highly suspect as being involved in his disappearance. Now, in this newer edition of Candyland, none of the characters are portrayed as potentially villainous, and instead the children are playing in the forest one day when they stumble into Candyland. They discover that their outfits have all changed, and they are now dressed in themed costumes that match their favorite types of candy, which is pretty neat because you see them depicted that way on the board. You have the kid with the candy cane, the girl with the little lollipop hair, the girl with the gummy bear ears are adorable. And then we have the one boy who's in plaid, which at first I was like, huh, what's up with that? And then I realized, oh, he's a chocolate bar, so the plaid represents the little squares. So very ingenious little design there. I found it to be lovely. But we have this whole story written about how the kids find their way into Candyland, and they come into possession of this magic bag, which they will take along with them on their adventure and fill it with all kinds of sweet treats as they visit each and every Edensian of Candyland in turn, finally meeting Queen Frostine at the end of their journey and giving her all the sweet treats that they collected. She, of course, helps them find their way home, but the children are welcome to come back and visit Candyland anytime they wish. So the kids are here under much less dire circumstances than in 1984, and it's simply a fun trip through Candyland, which is great because the journey is the focus here. If you even go back to like 2010, where I liked the 2010 edition. That was my next favorite after the 1984, was the 2010. They introduced some cool characters like the Duke of Swirl. I thought he was really cool. He was the ice cream guy. But that story, the kids are on their way to a lavish party with King Candy. That's fun, but I kind of thought that the kids finding their way to Candyland, similar to like Narnia, adds a little bit of whimsy and wonder that I thought was quite welcome. So that being said, overall, I think that the entire game is a wonderful package. The 2025 edition is a huge improvement over the last edition. I don't know if you've seen my previous video about Candyland. I'll have a link in the description. But the last edition we had, which I think was 2021, according to the copyright here, everything about this was cheap. Cheap. The little character movers, cheap thin plastic gingerbread men, the art. Well, the art was nightmare fuel. I mean, these characters looked like rejected Bratz dolls, and their attempt at inclusive art, I guess, really fell flat because it felt like tokenism. So I didn't really like it, whereas I feel like they did a really great job updating the characters in 2025. Everything feels good. The characters feel right. Their designs are wonderful. The kids are awesome and whimsical and fun. And more importantly, the overall quality, like the cards that came with 2021 were super cheap. The game board was like a weird size and super cheap. The art was busy and looked a lot like there was a ton of copy paste garbage on here. Now I looked at this and there are a few instances like the rock candy and the palace here that look copy-paste, but overall, because the art is so much more simplistic, there's not a lot of room or places where you would need to do a whole lot of copy-paste kind of stuff, so that it still looks clean and nice. So that being said, I feel like they did a really good job, and Hasbro definitely deserves credit where credit is due. Like, my literal only criticism on this, I have two criticisms. I have two, not literally only, but they're both very minor. One, the vacuum-formed package that holds the figurines could use a little extra leeway so that it's easier to get the figurines in and out of the package so it doesn't get discarded, because I can imagine the first couple times a kid wrestles those out, it's going to get tore up and they're just going to throw it away. And I really like how it holds them nicely in the display on these clear plastic frames on the box. So I'd like to see a small improvement to the vacuum form just to add a little extra space around the figurines, make them easier to pop out. And if the cardboard on these tokens was a little bit thicker. I had an issue popping mine out. One of them got really disfigured. Thankfully, Mrs. Old Crappy Couch is very, very good with rubber cement and managed to get the print back in place to where you can hardly tell unless you look. And I like to have the games looking clean. But I love the new dynamic of the magic bag. I like how they integrated it into the story. I love how all of the updated art for the characters looks great. Even if they've made some subtle changes to them here and there, it still fits. Thematically, it fits. Nothing feels weird or jarring or shoehorned or like they soften things. You know, like a lot of these games from the 80s, they have a hint of darkness to them. You still have a hint of darkness here with Lord Licorice. He's still got that, like, do I trust him? Do I not? He doesn't quite have the scary looking castle behind him and the evil looking Licorice Mounds, but he still has that little hint of, okay, there is still a little mystery to Candyland here. But overall, it's a very welcoming, a very fun place. It's a very nice adventure. I love the size of the board. It's generously scaled. The print is so lovely. The rules are printed full bleed, full color on nice sealed paper. They're not folded into quarters, so it's not going to fray over time. The game box is of decent quality. I have to say that I am absolutely pleased with every aspect of the modern 2025 Candyland, and I would dare say that this is easily one of the finest entries in the series. Candyland 2025 pleases the couch. This is one that you cannot miss. 100%, if you have young ones in your family, pick them up a copy of Candyland 2025. It's easily the best iteration of the game that we have seen in decades. Not one to be missed. If you enjoyed this review, I recommend you check out the link I have in the description here for my previous review of Candyland, where I go back a little bit further into the game's history. We look at a much earlier print, we compare it to the 1984, we compare it to the 2010 and the 2021 to kind of see the evolution of the game. I just had to do this review because we needed to see the 2025. It is absolutely superb, and it is most definitely a nod to 1984, which was Hasbro's first turn with the IP. Now they're coming back, and this is such a tour de force for Candyland. Bravo, Hasbro. Great job. Thank you so much for this wonderful iteration of this beloved classic. And thank you for joining me today. We'll see you next time.